What's up, no coders? In this month's video, we're going to do part 2 of how to build a no-code e-commerce store using Softr Integromat, Airtable and Stripe. In this video, we're going to hone in on the cart functionality and how you can build out cart functionality in your Softr e-commerce store. So as always, a lot on, and let's get going and let's build. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jamie and I've launched this channel really to try and show you how to build out nearly anything using the least amount of no-code tools possible. I hone in particularly on Airtable as the backend, Integromat as the brain and logic flow of your web app, and Softr as the face or the front end of your app. We've recently launched a no-code marketplace built using those three tools and also using Stripe integration, which is actually the key or the heart of the subject matter of today's tutorial. I've included all of the accompanying resources for today's tutorial on the Creator Exchange, and of course they're free as always. So if you'd like to download the content that accompanies today's video's tutorial, by all means do. There's a link in the description of the video here today, and as always, if you get any value out of today's content and video, we would really appreciate if you would click that subscribe button, and it really motivates us to keep going and to keep producing content and tutorials like this. So look, I've said a lot there, and it's time to actually get into the meat of today's video, which is how to build a cart in your Softr app using Stripe. Let's go. Okay, so today we are going to look at the add to cart functionality on this t-shirt shop that we built out in part 1 of this tutorial series. If you have not seen part 1, I'd probably recommend that you go and watch that first. It leads you up to this point in the build, so you'll be familiar with the layout and what we're looking at here, and also the layout of the Airtable base and the logic in terms of how we got to this point here. So today's tutorial is all about, I suppose, the challenge that we face as no coders in adding a little bit of advanced functionality into our Softr built web apps. Today I'm going to show you how I have used a webhook triggered Integromat scenario as a sort of workaround to create a sort of e-commerce cart functionality inside of this Softr built e-commerce store. I suppose the challenge we find is that, you know, where you come to a site like this, and I haven't had to sign up as a user yet, and you know, I've given no information to this particular web page that I've stumbled across. And I suppose, how is my Softr web app supposed to remember or hold on to the various different items that a user might add to their cart in the course of shopping? And I suppose the workaround that we're going to go through today, and the key learning points really from today, is number 1 is how to use the Softr API through a webhook triggered Integromat flow so that we can redirect a non-logged in user once they click this add to cart button to a temporarily logged in user by way of a webhook response passed back from the Integromat flow to the Softr web app. And so what that means is effectively the non-logged in user, when they click on add to cart here, the Integromat flow is going to create a temporary user in the Softr web app, in the Softr backend. It's going to generate a Softr magic link for that temporary user, and it is then going to pass that Softr magic link to the Integromat flow so that the user can then be redirected back to a logged in version of this particular website. And the reason that is useful is because once the user is logged in, now other actions that the user takes on your web app can be tracked against that temporary user. We don't need any personal information, or we don't need the user to sign up or actually fill out any relevant details. We just need to put in our Airtable base, I suppose, configuration that we're happy with so that we can identify that temporary user and track everything against that temporary user. And I'll show you all of that now over the next few minutes in terms of what way I've set this up. And you know, you might think of better ways to do it or more efficient ways to do it, but I suppose this is what I've worked out for now. And I suppose the primary driver behind this was, well, let's see what we can build with these tools. I've tried to keep it so that I just stick to the usual tech stack, being Airtable, Integromat and Softr that I've used in all of my tutorials to date. And I suppose the importance of that is that it keeps your no-code tech budget to a manageable level at all times, and also I suppose it enables us to explore what's possible in no-code land using the current features. So look, what I'll do is I'll probably talk a little bit today about webhooks and how no-coders can use webhooks to trigger Integromat flows and to trigger other actions and automations. We'll then look at the Airtable base layout for this particular project, and we will look at the Softr template layout for this particular project, and we will then look at the Integromat flows. And I suppose it's probably quite a technical one, a bit of a more complex tutorial than ones that I've done previously on this channel. So what I've done is I've made available all resources that accompany this tutorial on a new marketplace that I have created myself, again using these tools, which I have called the Creator Exchange. And there's a link in the description of this video below that you can go to, and you can access all of the accompanying resources for free. And you know, there'll be an embedded Airtable base there that you'll be able to copy over into your own Airtable workspace. So even if I don't go through every single field or every single column or every single table in today's tutorial, you'll be able to have a kick around and have a poke around yourself by copying that base into your own workspace. I'm also going to include a detailed Loom video step-by-step walkthrough through each of the Integromat flows that I'll briefly show you here today. And finally, I will include a Loom video walkthrough of the actual Softr template and the various configurations required for each of the blocks. That should really get you up and running for those of you that do want to take this further and do want to explore this functionality. There's probably other use cases that might come out of the woodwork for being able to create, I suppose, a temporarily logged in user. And yeah, look, I'd be excited to see what all of you out there can do with this and where you take this. And if you I'd absolutely love if you shared what you've done in the comment section below, and you know, who knows, we can maybe look at it in a future episode together. Okay, so that's enough of an overview on that. I'm going to get right into it now. So first of all, I'll show you what happens when I click the add to cart functionality. It's going to effectively trigger that Integromat flow that I mentioned, and the Integromat flow is then going to redirect me as the user to a Softr dynamically generated magic link. So it's going to log me in as a temporary user, and when you log in through a magic link in Softr, it defaults you to the home page of your Softr built web app. So what I'm going to show you is the layout of the Softr homepage and how I've used visibility settings on the blocks there, so that when you do get dynamically redirected this way, different blocks show. So your homepage looks different to what a non-logged in user's homepage looks like. So at the moment I'm not logged in, and when I land on this page, it looks like this. It's like a typical landing page. Open the toolbox. I'm going to buy an Airtable t-shirt today here, and I'll show you that layout as well. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about webhooks, because webhooks are really critical to this flow here, both to trigger the Integromat flow, also to pass the ID, the record ID, the Airtable record ID of the product that I am adding to my cart into the flow. And then also there's a webhook response at the end of the flow, which is crucial to sending the information back to this web app once the other bits in the flow have been completed. So let me just show you. Hopefully it works now for the live demonstration. I'm going to add this. I'm going to add a small navy Airtable shirt to my cart. Okay, here we go. Once we click, that has now triggered an Integromat flow in the background, which I'll show you the flow shortly. And it's currently signing me in as a temporary user into a logged in version of this Softr web app. Now you'll see here, if I scroll down below, what we have here is the cart. Okay, so the way I've built out this cart functionality is this is effectively a list block, and the list block has a conditional filter on it so that it only shows orders which are linked to the temporary user that has dynamically been created, and it's only going to show those orders in this list block here as a list block. What I will show you now is if we jump into the Softr Studio, you'll see this is the home page that I spoke about, and I've used visibility settings on the different blocks so that when the Softr Magic Link redirects the user, they don't have to see the landing page all over again. They just simply see what looks to be the store for them to continue shopping, and then this cart list block that I just mentioned below that. And the way to enable your visibility settings is, well, I want these blocks, this block and the block below it, to only be visible to logged in users, because now this user has temporarily been logged in and is being seen as a logged in user in the eyes of the app. These blocks up above it are specifically, and again this is important, to specifically identify the visibility settings on those as for non-logged in users rather than all users, because if this was all users, when my user who has just added something to cart gets redirected, they would see all of these blocks again as well as these blocks down below, whereas we only want them to see this. So that's how I've split out the layout throughout this whole web app, really is split between logged in users and non-logged in users, and what they see and don't see on the different pages within the web app. So if we get back to webhooks, okay, so the way the webhook works, well, we needed the webhook to send the product or the ID of the product that was being added to the cart. So for anybody that's brand new to webhooks are basically just a URL or a link, a web link that's created that can be used to communicate or trigger actions or automations, and it can be used to send additional information. So when we look at this webhook, when we look at this Integromat flow, which is the flow that just ran when the user clicked on the add to cart button, you'll see at the beginning here it's triggered by a webhook. So when we open this up, it shows you can create a webhook, and each time you create a webhook trigger, Integromat generates a unique webhook that you can then use in your app, whatever way you want to use it, whether it's a directly clickable link, whether it's a button field with a URL attached to it, or whether it's a Softr form which has the functionality to send data to a webhook. What I've done with this webhook is I've actually put it into my products table, which if you've watched part 1 you'll know is this junction table here. And the reason I put it in this products table is because I want Softr to visually present the webhook as a button on the junction or the products list view. But also the reason I put it in here is because I can use a formula here to effectively take the webhook from the Integromat scenario, and at the end of the webhook, so from this question mark onwards, what this is called is a URL parameter where you put a question mark, a name, and equals to. So in this case it's question mark record equals, and I wanted to add on the actual specific record ID of the relevant product, which is going to be unique for each row or each record in the junction table here. And the reason I wanted to do that is because that piece of information is critical to the rest of the Integromat flow, so that my app knows what product to present in the cart when the user is logged in now as a temporary user. So that's a nice trick to know. I mean, I can add all sorts of other parameters to this webhook if I needed to send other information to my flow. For example, I could send the name of the product, I could send the price of the product, anything else like that. It just so happens in my particular flow I'm able to get all those other bits of information from other modules within the Integromat flow, but it's more just so that you're aware, if you're new to webhooks, this is the power of them and this is what you can do. It's effectively a message that you can send with pre-coded information, and so that it can be used later in an automation or in a flow. So that's enough about the webhook trigger there. The other great thing about the webhook trigger is that it's instant, it's immediate. So once the button or the link is clicked, it will start the flow immediately. There's no wait time, there's no delay. You know, as I mentioned, I'm going to go through each of these modules in a Loom video so you can see precisely what fields align to which which fields here in the Airtable base. Let me come back to that, but while we're still on the topic of webhooks, I want to talk about the webhook response then at the end of this flow. So where I clicked on the buy now button, I had it redirect me to a dynamically generated magic link. Okay, so in order for that to happen, the flow, the web app here needs to basically receive back a webhook, and that's what a webhook response module is here in Integromat. And when you look at this, I click into this one, you can see it's sending a status 302, and it's sending a key value pair. Key location and value is a dynamic magic link. So this magic link is coming from step 36, which is this module here. And what that is, and again we'll go over this in a little bit more detail in a couple of minutes time, is this flow is basically triggering this HTTP module. The HTTP module is a module you can use in Integromat whenever a no-code tool or an app doesn't have its own native module inside of Integromat. And that is the case for Softr. So at the moment, to call the Softr API, you can use this HTTP module. And basically what that is doing is it's sending information into Softr using your own API key from your Softr app. And again, there'll be more information on this in the resources to the video on how to actually configure this. But the key thing for this part is that it's creating a magic link inside of Softr in your Softr backend. It is then pasting that magic link into the members table here. So this is the temporary user that we just set up a second ago by clicking that button, and here is the magic link for that user. And so this is the URL that is being passed into the webhook response at the end of this flow here, and it is automatically bringing the user to the home page here effectively, which contains those blocks that we showed you in the Softr layout earlier that are for logged in users only, and then on this particular block it's only showing the information relevant to that particular user using a conditional filter. So that is my crash course introduction to webhook triggers and webhook responses. One other really important point is for Softr users is that when you are sending information to Integromat through a form, through a Softr form, there is a slightly different configuration needed for the webhook response. And to show you that, I'll show you the second flow. If we come back to the web page, now when I have a logged in user, I've set this up slightly differently, more for illustrative purposes than anything else. In this case, I'm going to have the user add a Softr t-shirt to the cart, but this time using a form submit button rather than just purely a button on a list block, which is what we did the first time. And I know this might be confusing, but hopefully as you come to actually work through it, it'll make more sense. But essentially, now that I'm logged in, I'm now interacting with this app as a temporarily logged in user. And let's just say I'm buying a small white Softr t-shirt, and I now want to add that one to cart. You'll notice again, there's no choice for buy now, and that's because this particular list block has a logged in user visibility setting applied to it in the Softr backend. And so anyway, when I hit add to cart here, it's going to bring me to this intermediary page. So the first time when we added it to cart, it just added it to cart. This time around, I've added an extra step more so just to show you the difference in the webhook responses. And in this ancillary step or intermediary step, it's basically this block here, this field and this button is a form. It's a Softr form, and it is going to send whatever quantity of t-shirt, of this particular t-shirt that we specify, but also hidden in this form are hidden fields, and one of which is going to be the product ID, which we've shown in several of our previous tutorials, how to put hidden fields into a Softr form. And it's one of the big benefits of a Softr form over an Airtable native form, is that you can put hidden fields into it, and this logged in user doesn't have to fill in their email address again, or doesn't have to fill in, whatever product they've just selected. So we won't cover that again, but if you want to see how hidden fields work, I'd recommend that you check out the two last videos that we've done on this channel, one relating to the part 4 of how to build a client portal, and the one before that was part 1 of this series. The key thing here is when I hit this button, it's now considered a form submit as opposed to just purely a button on a list record. And when I click that button, it's now going to add 5 of these t-shirts to the cart. When I click that, this should again redirect me back to the home page. I'm still the current temporary logged in user, so I've used a different Integromat flow here because I don't want it to go and create a brand new temporary user each time. I want the current temporary user to be able to add additional stuff to its record. And if you look at the second flow here, it's a little bit shorter, and here's the custom webhook, and it is receiving the information that was passed to it from that form. And look, there it is there. You get the quantity. The member email is this temporary email address, which we'll cover a little bit more now when we look at the Airtable base. It's the ordered product ID, which is again was a hidden field from the form. Member record ID, which was again a hidden field from the form. The only thing we actually filled out in that form was the quantity. And so it passes that to the Airtable base. It's creating an order record. It's updating. It is updating the orders record with the session ID so that it adds it to the session. That'll make more sense now when I talk a little bit about orders and sessions and how that's used for the cart functionality. It is then creating an invoice item, and if you look at part 1, we talk in depth about how to use Stripe invoicing through Integromat, and there's a detailed step-by-step resource for that as well. But effectively, to recap, a Stripe invoice is made up of invoice items. Each invoice item is basically going to be a product or an individual order that is assigned to the invoice. When all of your items or orders or products are added to your invoice, and you can then finalize the invoice, and it will take whatever draft invoice items are assigned to that customer in Stripe at that point in time and create it on an invoice. Anyway, that's probably too much for today about the Stripe invoice thing. If you want a bit more on that or refreshing that, I suggest go back to part 1. And so the reason I'm showing you this one again is the webhook response. The format here is different. Okay, so where on the last one we saw that the webhook response was a 302 with the magic link dynamically applied in Integromat here. In this one, what we are doing is simply saying redirect to the shirt.softr.app, which is going to bring you back to the home page. And I suppose there we don't need to redirect to the magic link again. We just need to redirect to the home page, because the Softr app, that user that has now added another product to their cart, that Softr user is already logged in, and your browser will remember that. You don't need to re-log in every time. So it'll now just redirect me to that home page, as it did in the demonstration that I just showed you there. And now it has the 2 items that I've added to my cart. And when we come back into this, I suppose the other crucial difference here is the format of how this is done. The webhook response format is different for a form triggered webhook than a button triggered webhook. I've repeated that a couple of times, but it's just to differentiate on that so that you don't trip up on it when you come to build it out in your own apps. And in order to be able to do a form webhook redirect response, there's actually a little piece of custom code that needs to go into your Softr web app for your Softr web app to hear out or listen and catch that web response. You don't need this code for a button triggered Integromat webhook, but you do need it for a form triggered Integromat webhook where a webhook response comes back. And I'll show you where to put that in. If you come into settings in your Softr Studio, and if you go to custom code, this is where you paste it just right here. And I've again included a copy of that snippet of custom code in the resources on the creator exchange, so you'll be able to copy that and throw it into your own web app, and just to remember to do that before, and that's how your form triggered redirects will start working in your Softr built web app. So I hope I've covered a bit there, and I hope I've given you a good intro to webhooks and how to work with both webhook triggers and webhook responses with your Softr built web app. What we might just look at now briefly is the Airtable base, and as I mentioned, you'll be able to have a poke around at this yourself. But you'll see here the key thing to this base is, or the key thing to the cart functionality is that you're going to have a temporary member created, okay, and you're also going to have an order. So each time a product is added to the cart, an order line or order record is created. All of those orders are grouped into what's called a session, or a table that I've called a session here, okay? And when you look, a session is basically a cart. So when you look at this column here, orders, order number 168 and 167 and 168, they're the two products that we have currently in our cart. Here they are in visual representation. And when you look at this session, effectively what this is doing is it's grouping up all of the orders associated with this temporary session. This session ID, the primary field for it, is actually just the record ID of the session. And in our Integromat flow earlier, where we were creating a temporary user using the Softr API, what our flow here is actually doing is it's taking this session ID and it is making it the temporary name of the user. So where we don't have personal data, or we didn't need the user to sign up or fill out a form or anything like that yet, what's useful for us and our Softr web app is that the name of that temporary user is the same as the record ID of the session. And the reason that is really useful is because now we're able to use conditional filters inside of Softr, which I'll show you here on the cart list block. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I keep going back to conditional filters, and it's because it is probably one of the most powerful features inside of Softr, and they've actually just recently released, only this week, conditional filters for list blocks. And the week before that, they've actually done conditional filters for graph blocks. So both very exciting developments, and it basically is a way that you can present different information to different users by simply using a filter associated with that user. So in this case, what we've done is we have said where the session ID from session. So if we go to session and we're looking for the session ID, so that's that one there. So where that session ID is equal to the logged in user's name, which in this instance it's the temporarily dynamically created user's name, which because of our Integromat flow is going to be equal to the session ID, then please show that information. And that's exactly how we've achieved this cart functionality here. So this information will only show for this temporarily logged in user up until the point that they either empty the cart, which effectively is a sign out action inside of Softr. And so by signing out, this user will never be able to access that information, and for all intents and purposes that user is now a non-logged in user again, and it will appear that the cart is empty because there is no cart as yet. Or alternatively, the user can go to the checkout and complete the order. And when the user goes to the checkout and completes the order, that brings us to the last Integromat flow, again triggered by a form triggered Integromat webhook. And again, we'll give you the breakdown of the various modules here of what it's doing. But this is where, now that they're going to the checkout, we'll do it here with the two products. So let's go to checkout. So this is our form. So it's at this point now that the temporary user is actually going to submit their details, because they're deciding now, I do want to do this transaction, so I do want to give my details to the web page. And so in this scenario, let's just say, I mean, who's most likely to be shopping here? Probably the likes of Jeff Bezos. I think he gets a little bit fed up with going on Amazon the whole time and often looks for these sort of indie type shops. So we'll throw Jeff Bezos in there, right? I believe his email address is jeff@bezos.ie. He's got an Irish email address. Where is he at the moment? He's in space, I think, on his new rocket, but I think he's actually parked it in Dublin. And we'll just throw in any old country there, and D0. Okay, so when we hit proceed to payment here, Now this is the point where all of the guidance in part 1 about how to dynamically create a Stripe payment link using Stripe invoicing, that's where this comes in for your cart functionality. It is basically going to, when I click this button, it's going to trigger this workflow, and it's going to get the information from Airtable. It's then going to update the customer, so it's going to replace the temporary customer information with now the actual customer information based on what they filled out here. And then it's going to create the invoice, and when you create the invoice, it's going to take all of the Stripe invoice line items which correspond with effectively each of these order items, line items, which are tied to this session. And it is then going to finalize the invoice, and by finalizing the invoice, it is now going to generate a Stripe hosted invoice payment link. It's going to update all of that information into Airtable across the various tables here, and you can play around with all that when you download the resources and see what way that works. And then it's going to send another webhook response, but in this case we don't want it to redirect the user to the home page or to a dynamically created magic link. We wanted to bring the user to basically the checkout or the Stripe hosted invoice URL. And so that's what goes in here. It's being pulled from the finalize invoice Stripe module there. Again, you'll notice this is the format of a webhook response needed, where it is an Integromat Softr form triggered Integromat flow. Sorry if I'm tripping over my words, this can be a bit of a tongue twister. And so hopefully now when I click submit on this, it should bring me to a dynamically created payment page. And I suppose as a final step here, I've done another call into the Softr API, this time to delete that temporary user from the back end of the Softr user table. The reason being the temporary session is now completed, and the user has completed their order, and there's no need for that user to exist any longer. And now when that user is now effectively a non-logged in user again for the next time that they interact with the web page. You might prefer to go a different route with your flow. You might prefer that the user actually be updates with their actual information, and that they'll maybe be emailed a confirmation of their order with a Stripe or not a Stripe, a Softr magic link that they can then use for future purchases, and they can see summaries of their orders again. I just haven't done that in this example scenario here. Anyway, let's go to the grand finale presentation. Again, another live presentation. This has been a fairly successful one-shot take, I think. Hopefully I'll rewatch it now and probably cringe. Anyway, let's hit proceed to payment, and hopefully this will bring us to our Stripe hosted dynamically created payment URL through this Integromat flow here. Okay, here we go. Sometimes this can take a little bit of processing time, but I guess this is no code, so we just have to get used to our quirks. And here we go. So there's our dynamically created checkout page. It has created a payment for €185. If we just have a quick look at our invoice, it has each of our ordered items, and if we go back to our Airtable base, you'll see that that's precisely what we have in our order bucket here, and in our session it's basically pulling it all in. 118,500. So for Stripe, your amount needs to be in cents, so that's why it's 18,500 is represented by €185. So you see there, that looks like it's worked. And now when I hit pay, I've set up a webhook response in the Stripe dashboard, that whenever a session is completed or an invoice is paid, it's going to send back the response to my Airtable base. And in my Airtable base, I have an automation here that basically says, hi, listen out for a Stripe triggered webhook. So this is now a Stripe triggered webhook. That is Stripe is sending a webhook to my Airtable base, and then my Airtable base is taking action based on that Stripe triggered webhook. So again, another good example of how webhooks, they're so useful. They can be used everywhere. They're like sending a message from one platform to another to trigger a different action. So look, we'll trigger this here and we'll have a quick look. I suppose what I'm expecting to see is that this Stripe invoice status here changes from open to paid. So I'll try and jump across the screen to try and catch that in time. And if this works out, I think that is me for the tutorial today. And if you just want to hang on a little second longer, I'm going to show you a little bit about, I suppose, what's coming up in the next part of this series, and that is taking it to the extra advanced level and showing you how to use Stripe Connect in a no-code way. That's Stripe Connect is the module or the functionality inside a Stripe that lets you build a marketplace e-commerce site, as opposed to I suppose the difference there being the demonstration we showed you here is where you have one seller coming along and they're selling to multiple buyers. A marketplace app powered by Stripe Connect allows multiple sellers to set up on the one platform, and each of those individual sellers to have a shop on the platform and sell to multiple individuals. Meanwhile, the platform or the Stripe Connect thing coordinates all of the payments infrastructure in the back end, and it's all fully automated, so it takes out any complexities there. Anyway, let's see, does this work? Pay €185. I'm going to jump over to Airtable base. Hopefully this, we see the green box showing that an automation has run. And there it goes. It has updated to paid, and it has now deleted the user. And when I go back to shirt.softr.app, I should be a non-logged in user again, which is the case, and I can start the flow again. So that's it. It was a longer tutorial than usual, and look, if you're still with me, I hope you got some value out of that. And if you're still here and you haven't subscribed, I would please ask that you subscribe, as I'll be doing plenty more tutorials like this. Finally, let's just have a quick look at create.softr.app. So this is the marketplace. I'm actually signed in there at the moment, so I'll just sign out. And the idea here is that no-code creators can come along and they can list their works either for free or for sale for other no-coders to come along, and other no-coders can then either get access to the free resources, or they can pay a small amount towards a creator for access to a more premium type item, such as maybe an Airtable app or a particularly complex workflow, or perhaps it's a consultancy session, or perhaps it's an Airtable script, or perhaps it's you name it, anything I suppose that is a no-code resource that helps us all I suppose build out our projects and further our abilities in terms of bridging the gap between developers, coders, and the rest of the population, us, the no-coders. That's what this is all about. So look, I'd love if you'd like to head over there and maybe even think about becoming a creator and perhaps listing your own works on the platform. As I mentioned, this is all powered by Stripe Connect in the back end, and again, all I've used here is Softr Stripe and Airtable and Integromat to build this out fully. And yeah, I'm going to continue to list all of my resources for free on this platform, and feel free to have a browse and take what you like. Okay, look, I've definitely used my word quota for today, so thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. Talk to you later. Bye bye.